Rev up your engines!
It turns out that more and more sunroofs are exploding, the ones that are made out of glass. Now, since 1995 in the US and Canada, there's over 1,200 reports of exploding sunroofs. But 70% of this is since 2011. They've been in Toyotas, Hondas, you name it. All kinds of cars are having these exploding sunroofs. The one advantage is when they do explode, they explode out and not in. What the engineers have come up with a conclusion is that when they make the glass for the sunroof, it turns out that the inside part cools before the outside part when they're making the glass. So the outside part is more brittle than the inside part. So when it breaks out instead of breaking in, which is a good thing. But it can still scare the heck out of you when you're going down the road and all of a sudden you hear a big bang. A lot of people look, they'll jerk the steering wheel. It happened to one of my customers. She said she heard a big bang, but she used her head and felt the steering. She said, well, it's still going straight. It's not wobbling or anything. So she figured she didn't blow out a tire. And then her daughter said, look, the sunroof is blown out. And like I said, luckily, the glass blows out and not in most cases. It might be a good idea that if you do have a sunroof, when you're not using it, close the top. The sunroofs on all the good cars, up top over your head, there's a sliding piece so you don't get the light in, so you can close it when you don't want the light and open it when you do. Do like my wife does. She hates sunroofs anyways, even though her Lexus has one. She just leaves that closed the whole time so the light doesn't come in, because she doesn't like the light coming from the top anyway. So that might not be a bad idea for all you people out there that have sunroofs. If you're not using them, put that partition down to close it, so if anything does happen, none of the pieces will come raining down on your head. Tie Skates, it says, Scotty, I got an 04 GMC truck Sierra 1500 four-wheel drive. I had to disconnect the battery so I could replace the windshield squirter assembly. When I put it back together, it won't start. Help! You know, unfortunately, modern cars are getting more and more and more complex. Sometimes a simple thing like disconnecting the battery cable, and then when you put it back on, the car won't start. My advice is, don't ever do that again. Get one of those memory saver devices. You can get them at AutoZone, Amazon, eBay, all over the place. Basically, they plug into the OBD port, and then out of them, there's two clips that you hook up to a small 12-volt battery. That keeps the voltage there. It keeps you from losing computer memory, and that won't happen. Well, you didn't do that, so now you're stuck. From my experience with those things, because it is an 04 GMC and a dash called the body control module. That has a lot to do with the car starting. The last time somebody towed one of those over, I thought, okay, I've done this before, I'm going to try it again. I went on a dash, I unplugged the body control module, and I waited about 5 minutes, then I plugged the stupid thing back in, and it started up and ran perfectly fine. A lot of times that'll reset it. Now, if it doesn't reset it, you're probably going to have to find a guy like me with your giant scan tool, and sometimes you have to reset other things to make it start. But from my experience with those, a lot of times just unplugging the body control module clip, waiting about 5 minutes, plugging it in, it can start right back up again. But like I say, the next time you work on it, you got to disconnect the battery, hook up a memory saver, and you don't have to deal with any of that crap from now on. Jerome from Philly says, I got a 2000 Chevy 1500 V8. It cranks, it won't start, and it says check engine oil pressure. Let's hope it's a simple problem. The way they designed those vehicles, the oil pressure sending unit, if it shows low oil pressure, it won't send power to the fuel pump. It'll crank, but it won't start because you're not getting any fuel to the engine. It's basically a safety feature, so if you're driving down the road and you lose oil pressure, instead of the engine running until it blows up, it shuts fuel off and the engine doesn't run anymore. You want to pray that it's just a bad oil pressure sending unit. It often is. Buy one, put it in, not that big of a deal, it just bolts out and bolts in. You can get them like an AutoZone. If you don't have the tool, they'll sell you the socket that goes on it for $10 too, and replace it. If that fixes it, great. If not, then odds are you actually have low oil pressure and your engine's on the verge of wearing out. To check that, you just put a gauge on where the oil pressure sending unit goes and you check the pressure. And if the pressure is 0 or really low, then you're probably going to have to rebuild the engine. It's 2,000 units, so many miles. It's probably got a lot of miles. And if an engine wears out, it'll do that. Pray it's just the oil pressure sending unit. A lot of times it is because, like I said, if you don't have oil pressure, it shuts the fuel pump off. And if the sending unit is broken and it tells you it's got no pressure, even though it does, it won't won't send any fuel pressure. Lily's a Skater 10 says, I got a 2011 BMW X3 X-Drive. It cranks, but it doesn't start. And it's got the code P016 crankshaft position correlation error. Those things are endless money pits as they age. And I've seen it on many of them. That has a variable valve timing system. In BMW's case, it's called the VANOS system, V-A-N-O-S. And it's probably the most complex variable valve timing. And I have seen many of those things where they use timing chains, not a belt, where the chain goes on the sprocket with all those teeth. That VANOS thing often strips and moves. It was kind of a design flaw. They didn't build them all that right. So the first thing you want to do is have somebody take the valve cover off. And if they see that timing chain has ripped it off and the stupid VANOS thing is shredded to the side, odds are you're going to need another engine, because when it does that, pistons hit the valves, bend the valves. Those are very complex engines. The last time I had a customer like that, they junked the car. They said, I'm not going to fix that. And the time before that, I sent it to a friend of mine who does nothing but BMWs. And even he said, you're not going to fix this thing. And he found a used engine from Germany and had that installed. And it ran fine, but it cost a small fortune by the time it was all done. Those are not cheap cars to fix. They do break down. They're not bulletproof. They were bulletproof 30, 40 years ago, but they aren't anymore. My advice, stay away from them. Joey the Luca says, got an 011 Kia Sorento. I hear a grinding noise. The check engine light comes on, so do the track lights, and it's got the code C1260 for steering angle sensor circuit signal. Modern cars are so complicated. You got traction control, you got ABS brakes. There's a part called the steering angle sensor, and that measures where your steering is so it knows how to adjust things for your traction control. So if you slam on the brakes and it sees the car's pulling to one side, then it'll change the brakes so it'll go back straight instead of pulling to one side. You got a problem in that system. Now, you do say you have a grinding noise. Well, my experience with those Kias are, whenever you get that code and you hear a grinding noise, it means the sensor is broken and it's grinding, because when you turn, instead of it being smooth, it's broken inside and it makes a grinding noise. So if that grinding sound's coming from your steering column, odds are you're going to need a steering angle sensor. Now, you can't do this yourself. You got to take the airbag off, take it all apart, but even if you did all that, put it in, it won't work, because it's got to be reprogrammed by a guy like me with the programmer. Call around and see what mechanics charge to change the steering angle sensor for that vehicle, and have them do it for you. Ryan Toast 99 says, I got an '08 Chevy Silverado. My seat belts won't retract. A more modern vehicle like that is a bit more complex than the old ones. The old ones were strictly mechanical, and when they didn't retract, there's a spring inside the retractor and it's got a gear. And that system would break down. Sometimes you get lucky, take it apart, lube it with some WD-40 and getting to work again. But yours is electronic, so that's not going to cut the mustard. There is a module. I would check that module. The module is very low. A lot of times, especially if you've been in any kind of flood water or rain got in the car, they get filled with water and they don't work. So you might want to check that. Let's say it's full of water. Then you just got to replace it. Go to the dealer and buy it, the seatbelt module. You might try, though, if it isn't wet. Open the door, close the door, put the key in, try to get it to retract. Hit it with a hammer. If you hit it with a hammer and then it starts to retract, then you know the module's bad. It's just like you got an old toaster and you hit it with a hammer, it works. You know something's wrong inside and you just replace it. Because with the modules, you can't fix them. You have to replace the whole thing as a unit. All these computer module systems, I think they're so they can make money fixing the cars when they break. Jerry the First says, got an '09 Ford Fusion, 2.3 automatic. I've got the code P0660 for intake manifold tuning valve control problem. That is a known flaw on those. The intake manifolds on those are tunable manifolds. So they have a little assembly that can open and close to change how much flow is inside. One is for better acceleration, one is for better gas mileage, and those systems just break because they were cheaply made. Sad but true. All that plastic crap, the heat of the engine gets to it and they stick. And the only really way to fix that plastic junk is by replacing the entire intake manifold itself. You really want to try taking it apart and trying to lubricate it, but it's all plastic. And then they end up sticking again, or if you see it's grabbing somewhere and you file it down, well, you're changing the flow of the air, and the computer doesn't know that, so really the only true fix that I've ever found on those is replacing the whole intake manifold assembly with a new one. Now, if you could find an aftermarket one from a company like Dorman, go right ahead. They're generally well made because they're redesigned to work right in the first place. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.